faithfully delivering value, decoding great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today we're exploring the book The Truth About Data. Its subtitle is Making Smart Decisions in the Digital Age. Oh, when talking about data, you might first think of the big data trend that's been so popular lately. By processing and analyzing massive data sets, we can optimize traffic routes and predict election outcomes. But today, we're focusing on the small data in our daily lives, from food labels to weather forecasts, bank accounts to healthcare that people rely on for decisions. Yet, businesses intentionally release distorted small data to mislead consumers, setting data traps. That's the truth about data. This book explains key statistical concepts to help interpret everyday data, teaching you to spot data lies and extract useful information from overwhelming amounts. The authors are John Johnson and Mike Gluck. John holds a PhD in econometrics from MIT. As a data expert, he runs an economic consulting firm that requires evidence-based decisions. This data-driven company has been featured by national media like NBC and The Washington Post. Co-author Mike graduated from Johns Hopkins and leads an ad agency. As a marketing expert, he excels at simplifying complex topics. All right, let's uncover data truths through 4 traps: sampling, averages, causality, and conclusions. First, the sampling trap, how selection affects outcomes. In 2017, China ranked 79th in global happiness. But did anyone ask you, Chinese men average 167.1 centimeters tall. But did anyone measure you? If your data was never collected, where did these numbers come from? This introduces a key statistical concept: sampling. Such conclusions come from analyzing samples. A sample is partial data extracted to represent the whole population. Why analyze samples instead of the entire population? When studying practical issues, having complete data on the subject is naturally ideal. With simple statistics, we can then determine the quantitative characteristics of the entire population. And for instance, the population's average represents its general level, but reality is more complex. Some subjects have vast scopes, making full coverage difficult, like seawater salinity. Some involve enormous quantities, like the average height of Chinese men. Some tests are destructive, like checking a batch of light bulbs' lifespan. Thus, it's impossible and unnecessary to measure every single unit in the population. That's when we sample part of the population and use it to infer the whole's quantitative characteristics. For example, a TV station wanting to know a program's female viewership proportion could survey a sample audience, then infer the overall proportion from the sample's female viewership. However, when selecting samples, 3 points matter: representativeness, authenticity, and randomness. If the sample fails these, conclusions become flawed. Let's start with representativeness. Representativeness means sample findings can be generalized to the entire population. It typically fails for 2 reasons: inappropriate sample size and biased data collection. First point, inappropriate sample size directly affects sampling error. Say we sample just 200 people randomly nationwide to determine Chinese height averages. That sample is too small. China's vast size means many regions' data would still be missed. Conclusions from such small samples lack representativeness, but oversized samples are also problematic. And oversized samples reduce error but increase workload, time, and costs, undermining sampling's advantages. So how many samples are appropriate? This complex question depends on the subject's state and required conclusion precision, among other factors. Here, we just need to learn to notice sample sizes when seeing statistics and spot any unreasonable aspects. The second reason is biased data collection. One-sided data makes samples lose diversity. For example, current U.S. psychology research often bases conclusions on narrow populations rather than diverse groups. The U.S. has under 5% of world population, but dominates over 60% of samples in some studies. Ignoring 95% of humanity means we can't get accurate theories about humans. This cherry picking happens beyond academia, too. Businesses filter samples to get favorable conclusions in ads. Like when baby brands claim 4 out of 5 pediatricians recommend them. But actually, the company filtered data, only 12% genuinely recommended that brand. Many pediatricians didn't recommend any products due to concerns about additives. The company excluded those responses, creating the false impression that 4 out of 5 recommend it. Next is authenticity. Samples must not only represent but be genuine. If sample data is fake, any conclusions from it are meaningless. Especially be wary of self-reported data authenticity. Self-reported data comes from personal statements, and its truthfulness is highly questionable. People often lie about themselves. They struggle to objectively evaluate their own behavior. Studies show 55% of Americans believe they're smarter than average. 93% claim above average driving skills. These surveys are technically real, but we have good reason to doubt their truthfulness. How can it be real when over half think they're better than average? Finally, randomness. Non-random samples may fail to yield meaningful conclusions. Why do I say that? Let me give you an example. Back in 1969, the US had been stuck in the Vietnam War quagmire for 4 years with no victory in sight. Casualties kept mounting. Anti-war movements surged domestically, and more young men started dodging the draft. The draft system was flawed. Wealthy families could postpone or avoid service, which was deeply unfair. To calm public anger, the draft board implemented a lottery system, randomly selecting birthdays to decide who'd go to war. In theory, random selection meant equal chances for everyone, seemingly fair. But the next year, the New York Times published statisticians exposing the draft lottery wasn't random. The article showed December births had higher selection odds than January births. Why? Turns out birth dates were put in 12 boxes by month, and staff poured January slips first into the drum. Later months ended up on top, so December slips got drawn first. Simples matter in statistics because different ones can yield opposite conclusions. Imagine a small restaurant, open lunch to dinner. The owner counts customers hourly and finds crowds only at noon and 6 p.m. If a potential buyer asks about business, the owner samples peak hours to make it seem packed. But if the landlord threatens rent hikes, the owner samples dead hours instead. He pleads, "Oh, don't raise it. My place is empty most of the time." By selecting different samples, the owner draws opposite conclusions. All right, that wraps up part one. When facing data or conclusions, ask 3 questions. Is the sample representative? Is it authentic? And is it randomly selected? These questions help avoid sampling traps. Part 2, the averages trap. This section teaches us to identify which type of average the data presents. Most people assume average means the arithmetic mean, adding all sample data and dividing by the count. But actually, averages reflecting general sample levels include weighted averages, mode, and median, not just arithmetic mean. Failing to distinguish these can lead to misinterpreting samples. First, the arithmetic mean strength is abstracting a representative value for a group aspect. Say a production team has 10 workers with different salaries. To show their general level, we can't use one worker's salary. We calculate the average instead. But arithmetic mean has 3 flaws: ignores data importance, overlooks gaps between points, and gets skewed by outliers. First flaw, it can't reflect data importance. Using it implies all data points are equally important, that each point's importance to the whole differs. Like assessing student grades through 3 tests: quiz, midterm, and final exam. These tests have different difficulty levels. Finals are hardest, midterms next, quiz is easiest. Simply adding scores and dividing by 3 masks their varying importance. The resulting arithmetic mean can't accurately reflect student performance. The solution: assign weights. Say 50% to finals, 30% midterms, 20% quizzes. Based on importance. Multiply weights by corresponding exam scores. Sum these for the weighted average, which better represents student performance. Second flaw, it can't reflect specific gaps between data points. For example, Switzerland ranks first in the UN's Global Happiness Report, UK 21st. Using regional arithmetic means that ignore internal variations. Take the UK, ranked 21st. On a 1 to 10 scale, its average happiness index is 7.3. But look closer and you'll find regional variations. Many areas hit 7.9, higher than some top-ranked countries. The arithmetic mean masks these differences, falsely suggesting the UK trails Switzerland. Using the mode avoids this trap. The mode is the most frequent value in a dataset, better reflecting central tendency. For example, most UK regions cluster around 7.6 happiness. Only a few lower areas drag down the overall average. Thus, using the mode value of 7.6 more accurately represents the UK's general level. The arithmetic means third flaw, it's easily skewed by outliers. Outliers are data points that don't fit the pattern. Like when a 1.7-meter person joins 2-meter basketball players, that height becomes an outlier. Such outliers massively distort averages, but the median avoids this flaw. First, arrange data in order. The median is the middle value in this ordered list. It splits data into equal halves, one below, one above, so extremes don't affect it. Even when we identify which average is used, relying on just one metric can still mislead us about the sample. Say, two schoolgirl groups. One averages 45 kilograms, the other 50 kilograms. You might think the lighter group is slimmer, but add average heights, the lighter group is much shorter, so actually the heavier group is slimmer. Judging solely by one metric traps us with averages. All right, that covers the averages trap. Next, let's explore the third trap, the causality trap. This section teaches us to distinguish correlation from causation. What exactly is the causality trap in data? For example, recent data shows intelligent people share these traits: wearing glasses, using iPhones, staying up late, being left-handed, and handling alcohol well. These traits are thought to have a special connection to intelligence. So if you want smarter kids, get them glasses and iPhones, train them to drink and use their left hand, and ideally, let them stay up later. Your child will surely become brilliant. How ridiculous is that? In reality, many phenomena have interdependencies. We call this interdependence correlation. Correlation falls into two types: causal and non-causal. Causation means one variable affects another, like abnormal iodine levels causing higher thyroid disease rates. But correlation doesn't imply causation. For instance, China's GDP and India's population growth are strongly correlated, since both rise rapidly. But clearly, there's no causal link between them. Another classic confusion is birth months and soccer success. A recent soccer study shows being born in early months helps become a professional player. They analyzed nearly 30,000 players from top leagues in 31 European countries. 35% were born January-March versus only 19.3% October-December. Why? Does birth timing actually determine soccer potential? The truth likely lies in player selection systems. Youth players train in same year groups. Early-born children have physical advantages at 13, 14, making them stand out. So birth timing correlates with, but doesn't cause soccer success. What causes the difference between correlation and causation? It's omitted variables. Often there are more than two variables. You see a relationship between two, but miss a crucial third factor. In the birth month and soccer player case, that factor was the omitted variable. The omitted variable here is player selection systems. Grouping same-year trainees gives early-born players physical advantages to become professionals. Fail to identify this and conclusions become flawed. So, how do we spot omitted variables to distinguish causation from correlation. The author offers two suggestions. First, ask a simple question. What else could explain this? Like smart people wearing glasses, probably because they read more and prolonged reading affects eyesight. Reading time becomes the omitted variable. Second, check if it aligns with common sense. For example, higher ice cream consumption correlating with rising crime rates. This clearly defies common sense. We can't reduce crime by banning ice cream. The real omitted variable, outdoor temperature. Warmer weather like summer makes people eat more ice cream. So, also, longer summer days mean more open windows. Both factors increase crime opportunities. That concludes part 3. When facing claimed causal relationships, ask, is this truly causal or just correlated? What other factors explain it? Does it align with common sense? These 3 questions help avoid the causality trap. Part 4, the conclusion trap. This teaches us to evaluate conclusion reliability. In life, we accept conclusions backed by experts or authorities, making them seem unquestionable. But you should still ask 2 questions. First, how credible is this? Could it be coincidence? Second, does this conclusion actually matter to us? These 2 questions help us view conclusions rationally and make sound decisions. First, let's examine the initial question. How credible is this conclusion? For instance, say a friend claims he never misses a shot. He shoots an arrow and hits the bullseye. You think he's accurate, but is that conclusion reliable? You only saw him shoot once. How can you confirm if it's skill or just luck? This is where we can use a statistical concept, statistical significance. If his archery performance shows statistical significance, we can confirm your friend truly excels at it. So, what counts as having statistical significance? There's a standard, usually expressed as a p-value, usually expressed as a p-value, usually expressed as a p-value, and use expressed as a p-value. The smaller this value, the higher the conclusion's credibility. Specifically for your friend, how do we tell if it's real skill or just luck? The solution? Have him shoot more times. If he hits every time, the p-value is 0, making the never misses conclusion credible. But if he misses several times, the calculated p-value is higher, showing luck was involved. Second question, does this conclusion matter to us? Even with statistically significant data, you must ask, what impact will this study have on our lives? For example, many papers claim coffee prevents certain diseases, like coffee preventing cancer, diabetes, or heart disease. But how big is the benefit? Does it reduce cancer rates by 10% or by 0.0000001%? If it's the latter, what's the point of saying coffee prevents cancer? Moreover, just looking at the effect isn't enough. We must consider the economic cost. The research shows long-term bird's nest consumption whitens skin, but given its high cost, this conclusion is meaningless for most. So when facing data-driven conclusions, we must ask, how credible is this? And what significance does it hold for our lives? Answering these helps you escape the conclusion trap. All right, that about wraps up the truth about data. Now let's summarize how to spot data traps and see the truth. Sometimes the best way to uncover the truth is to ask questions. In this world of tangled interests, everyone tries to persuade you with data. When facing data in our daily lives, we can dig into the truth behind it by asking a series of questions. Is the data sample representative? Is it authentic? Was it randomly sampled? Which type of average is being presented? Is there really a causal relationship between the variables? Is this conclusion authentic? Does it matter to us? These questions help us become mature data receivers and make wise decisions in life. All right, that's the truth about data. That's the end of our book interpretation. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.